Hello. Um, we're back again for the final time for now. Um, since I'm not going to be making anything on part 9 until it has been finished. Um, I do plan on making a video um, going over all 8 parts, but I'll do that sometime in the week. But this is the final sort of post-read review, I guess. For the time being, here we are. With part 8. JoJolion I'm going for, rather than like JoJolion, but I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that correctly. This is probably going to be the hardest for me to pronounce things correctly in general. I'm gonna be fucking stuff up here, I think. Um, but yeah. Sorry, this one took a while. Stuff was happening, but also to not to be a bit rude, but it was a bit harder for me to find the motivation to read this one because, to be honest, I don't think it's quite as good as the past few parts have been. Um, so I did take a couple of just full breaks from reading it, but here we are. It's done, and I didn't hate it or anything. It was still perfectly fine. Um, but yeah, had a few things that I just didn't find particularly strong. Um, but also some things I thought were really great. So this one's interesting because um, they sort of skip over because Steel Ball Run is sort of a retelling of part one, I guess, more than anything. But there is no retelling of two and three. I think we can assume that they happened, but they're not there, right? Um, and instead we're looking at um, ooh, just randomly had like a mind reset. Sorry, we're looking at a retelling of part 4, as is quite obvious from the fact that we are back in the town of Morio. But even later in time this time, we're in probably, it must be 2011. Um, I think because it may be 2012 because it's right after the Sendai earthquake, which was in 2011. I don't remember when, but it was in 2011. So, but it's been a while after that. The houses have been rebuilt. Um, And also there's these um, wall eyes which have risen out of the ground in the town of Morio. And I'm pointing them out because they're one of a few things where there's a bit more setup than payoff for them. The way the first chapter introduces these things, it's like these are going to be like very important all the time. And look at these like weird patterns and stuff, right? Look at this, like it's all these lines and stuff. But Uh, it never really comes out like that. There's nothing particularly special about the walleyes. There's some stuff in specific parts of the walleyes and stuff, but like the walleyes themselves, there's no innate magic to them, and that's kind of unfortunate, right? Because this is one of several things where the setup came in, and the payoff just didn't feel like it was there, which is probably the biggest issue with the manga as a whole, really. But either way, we've got into part 4 essentially here, where we have a sort of small town. The whole thing is concentrated in this town, um, with a bunch of sort of characters, and everyone sort of knows each other. I don't really need to explain this to you. It's the same as part 4. It's a small town. There's not much going on, but there's some level of sort of shadiness underneath, and there's a lot of stand users for reasons. Um, and we also have a protagonist that is it's Josuke. This is our protagonist. He is Josuke Higashikata. That is his name. So it's the same as part 4. Very different stand, a very different character, but it is the same name. In fact, that's not even his real name, confusingly, because he's adopted, but he's also adopted at this age because um, he wakes up with amnesia, having sort of been buried under these walleyes that were formed by the earthquake. Um, and he's found by this girl Yasuho, and then she takes him to the hospital, and then a bunch of stuff ensues, and then they come. Um, but he has no idea who he is. He gets adopted by the Higashikata family and given their name Josuke. And then the main premise, at least at the start of the story, is that Josuke wants to find out who he is, why is nobody looking for him, and why was he buried there. Um, Lots of things to talk about there. Um, and that's our protagonist. But most importantly, thematically, what this is more about is giving Josuke a family. This is a manga all about like family and Araki's understanding of family. Um, so you know, oh, that's a really low quality image. Jesus Christ. That was, um, here's the family, the Higashikata family, pretty extensive. Um, and so we've got Norisuke, who is descended from Steel Ball Run Norisuke, and he's the sort of head of the household. And then he's got 4 children. We've got Hato, we've got Joshu, Jobin, and oh my god, I've forgotten her name. Hold on. That's really bad. That's really embarrassing. Um, Hold on. That's so bad. It begins with a D. Daya over here. And Jobin, he's like 30 or something, and he's married to this lady Mitsuba, and they have a child called Tsurugi. That's our family, and they've also got a maid. Um, there we are. And the sort of slow thing that builds throughout this part, and the most compelling part of this manga in general, is how Josuke slowly gets accepted into the family, and by the end he is, he may as well have been there the whole time. He may as well have been there for the first, 17 years of his life as well. Um, it's very sweet, it's very compelling. The relationships between this family are the core of the manga and easily like the strongest part. These are the best characters, as well as Yasuho, the girl who finds him, as well. Speaking of, so she is sort of this main duo with Josuke, since she's the person who finds him, and she sort of becomes obsessed with helping him. And there's some level of sort of romantic ideas here. It's not really fully fleshed out. I sort of wish it was a little more fleshed out, but yeah. And I mean, it's all very clear. Her stand has like this very obvious sort of symbolic thing where it's basically able to like um, guide people. Look, and it's like a map. It can be used to track people. So it's almost like she's a guide for Josuke. It's obvious, but it is very effective. Um, I thought Yasuo was like probably my favorite character from the part, to be honest. If I had to choose, Josuke, he's kind of a bit gormless at times, and maybe a bit too like generic JoJo's protagonist, especially compared to like Johnny and JoJolion, and even Giorno, who were more complex protagonists than him. But I don't mind it necessarily. But yeah, I feel like Yasuho is the stronger character, really. Um, but yeah, And their dynamic is great. It's probably the strongest dynamic in the part. And she's basically, not a member of the family, but still very important. And like I said, she's almost like a guide for Josuke in trying to work out, who he is. As for who he is, um, he's two people who were merged together, basically. Now, I'm going to be honest. This is like the most confusing part of JoJo's so far. And I have absolutely no idea how this works. But basically, this fruit is like a magic fruit. Think about it like it's like an alchemy fruit, in that it has like it when you eat it, it heals something, but it takes something else away. It's like an equivalent exchange type of thing, right? But in this case, these guys stole one from the sort of villains. These two. Oh, and I forgot to mention this guy's name is Josefumi, and this part's Kira. This is Kira, um, as in the villain of part 4, but he's like a good guy this time. Um, they stole one, they grafted it to this other tree, and that caused it to change a bit, so it's like more potent. Kira is killed, and Josefumi eats the fruit, and then they merge together and lose their memories, and that's who Josuke is, which we learn at about the I'd say about the halfway point. In the story, because this is a story with two clear parts within it. And the first part is Josuke discovering his identity, and the second part is about him getting the fruit, because the fruit that was grafted to the tree, that branch is somewhere, and they're trying to find it basically. Um, in terms of an idea, I think this is really great. It's a really, really strong concept to me, because it's basically these two people who are very different, but well, not very different actually. They're different though. They've been merged together, and you can see it in the sort of subconscious personality of Josuke. You can see things that are like Kira, and a lot of stuff that's like Josefumi as well. And obviously Josefumi as well. He does look like Part 4 Josuke. He has the hair. Um, so there's a lot going on there. Um, I'm trying to remember what the next slide is going to be before I hit the button to go to it, because I can't even remember what I put next. Oh yeah. So importantly with Josuke, both of the two people within him are defined by the actions of their mother. Which is notable because he then gets adopted into a household which doesn't have a sort of maternal figure. So with Kira, his mother is Holly, as in, Holly Joestar. Um, and she is like incredibly kind, basically. Whereas Josefumi, his mother is an idiot, basically. She like lets her baby like nearly drown in the sea, and then he gets taken away from her and adopted. Um, and actually, at the end of the story, Josuke just like randomly bumps into her, and it turns out that on her phone she had like a bunch of pictures of him. So the sort of idea is that she never really cared for Josefumi, and he thought that, and that's what sort of shaped his character. Um, because he received so much compassion from people who like didn't need to give him compassion, even though he didn't receive that compassion from people who sort of traditionally should be giving you that compassion, like your own parents. But like Kira and I think Holly as well were like the people who actually like treated him kindly and stuff, and that sort of shaped his philosophy and stuff, and why he even ate the fruit, and that also informs a lot of Josuke's decisions, because Josuke views Holly as essentially his mother. Um, And as you can see, she has this. She's dying. That's why he's trying to get the fruit. But anyway, I'm explaining this incredibly badly. But that's so. This is like this. Let me just hold on a second. Okay. So Josefumi is basically what am is that what I'm trying to say? I already said that. I already said that. This isn't going very well. Um, but yeah, importantly, because there's no maternal figure in his adopted family, he still gets to view Holly as essentially his mother. Um, and as like a separate part of like his family that isn't the rest of the family's family, I guess. Um, but yeah, oh yeah, I was talking about the pictures. I was talking about the pictures. Yeah. So Josefumi's mother had like pictures of him in her phone, even like 15 years later or something. Probably not that long. Um, and that's to sort of show this idea that like she really cared about him the whole time. Um, I feel like that's kind of silly. Is that weird to say? Um, I feel like that goes against the idea put forward here, which is more like, you know, it who actually is your family isn't necessarily determined by genetics, and then that's kind of undermined by the idea that the one sort of genetic link to Josefumi actually did care about him the whole time. If they had just made her like completely negligent and not put that twist in, I feel like it would have made that sort of message regarding Josefumi and Kira stronger. But either way, I think this whole section is pretty strong. This idea of like sort of maternal figures and how they don't necessarily need to be like related to you. I like it, and I like the whole thing about sort of being adopted and found families and stuff like that. It's all very strong. Um, yeah. So now we get to talk about how he manages to sort of be accepted into the family, and each person and how they have to accept him, because it all sort of functions differently depending on the person. Um, so with Norisuke, um, with him, it's all about sort of this mutual trust. So from very early into this, him being adopted, Josuke is very suspicious of Norisuke, which is like reasonable. Um, he's a little weird. He's a little shady. Um, and also, you know, Josefumi, he's being attacked. Not Josefumi, Josuke. He's being attacked by stand users, including people who are in the family and also the maid as well, but that's unrelated. But then when Tsurugi is put in danger by one of these sort of main enemy stand users, and they're the only two around who can help him out, um, there's sort of they gain this mutual trust for each other, and then they become basically allies for the entire rest of the story. And that trust is sort of emphasized through their stands, because this is one part where people really don't like to show off their stands, which is a bit of a difference from every other part, really. So the fact that they show each other their stands, that's sort of the symbol of sort of mutual trust and stuff. And from then on, Norisuke is on the side of Josuke. Before this, he was actually trying to almost like groom him, almost. Not in like a sexual way, but like he was trying to like prepare him to basically be this sacrifice. I'll get into that in a bit, but yeah. But after that, he basically accepts that Josuke is a member of the family. He can't do anything bad to him. He's part of this family. You have to be like good or whatever. And Norisuke is also like generally like his philosophy about how he should treat his family and how his family should operate is also the philosophy of the story. Um, and it's very much this place of like compassion, making sure everyone is comfortable and safe, um, and that he is almost like this sort of protective person, since he's by far the most senior person in the family. Um, and I think that it's very clear that the story is also trying to tell you that this is like right. And do I agree? I don't really know. I'm not a fucking family expert, but I think it's certainly not a harmful message or anything. So I'm pretty happy with that, and it's communicated very effectively. Um, as for Tsurugi, um, he's really strange. So with Tsurugi, uh, as he's the firstborn son of the of a Higashikata, which means that at about 10 or 11 years old, he's gonna get this disease that turns him to stone, and the only way to cure it is for somebody else to sacrifice themselves for you. This is why Norisuke was like doing all that with Josuke. He wanted Josuke to be the sacrifice for Tsurugi, I think. But either way, in order to trick the disease, they also dressed Tsurugi up as a girl, by the way, because that's how disease works, I'm sure. I have no idea why the disease is there. There's probably an explanation. I think I forgot it. But it doesn't matter. This disease is important because it's basically a source of internal struggle within the family. So it's sort of representative of something you might actually get in real life, which isn't a disease that will turn you to stone. But disease is something that would do this, of course. Um, and Tsurugi is also quite important because they're the only child in the family, or young child in the family, um, which plays a role. So everyone is very much protective of him. Um, and he's also frequently targeted by villains, I guess, by antagonists, I guess, because he's easy to manipulate, he's easy to fool, and in fact, he's almost basically manipulated by his own father, but we'll talk about that later. Um, anyway, Tsurugi is one of the first people to really be like, yes, this is just basic. This is my brother to Josuke, pretty much. Even though he's not, he would technically be an uncle, but symbolically he's a brother. Um, partly because of the sort of double rescue him and Norisuke do, but already before that point, Tsurugi actually attacked Josuke with his stand, and then Josuke was able to break through it, and they sort of became. He sort of gained respect for him through that as well. Um, but yeah. And while Tsurugi is like a very strong character and symbolically very strong, and this idea of being a child and sort of safety and protection that the rest of the family needs to give out to Tsurugi, which often they aren't able to do, and he ends up in like danger or being manipulated or um, being framed for like a attempted murder at one point. Um, it's all a little undermined by this very stupid joke where he's like weirdly perverted. So Yasuho is like exploring behind. This is our introduction to Tsurugi, by the way. Yasuho is like exploring behind the sort of estate they all live on, because they live in like a giant house. Um, and then Tsurugi like pulls her into this bunker, and then the first thing he does is like lick her fucking ear. And then there's repeatedly like this joke where he does these weird things towards Yasuho, and I'm sorry, but it isn't funny at all, right? You know, I get that it's supposed to be a joke, but it just doesn't work. It just isn't funny, and it undermines um this sort of idea that, you know, we need to be concerned for Tsurugi because they're a child, because he's a fucking shit. So like, why would I really care as much, right? It's not as bad as some of the other characters, which I'll talk about in a minute, but it's certainly not great um, at all. Um, then we have the two sisters, Dio, I've already forgotten it again, and Hato. Um, these are two characters who are very much forgotten for large portions of the story, which is really unfortunate, because both of them are quite interesting when they're actually used. So with Dio, um, she is basically sent by Norisuke to like basically force Josuke into like mindless slavery using her stand, which I can't really be able to bother to explain, but it's like it can like take memories from people. Um, but then in the end, because she's sort of outplayed by Josuke, she's just in, right? She just completely accepts him into the family. This is the first person to do it. Um, and after that point, she doesn't do anything else, which I think is a shame. Um, because there is potential there. And the same is true of Hato, except the only moment of significance she has comes at the halfway point, because it turns out that her like new boyfriend is like a really important like key antagonist in the story, and everyone else in the family has been like incapacitated except for her and Josuke, and he is essentially he needs to convince her that um he is like the bad guy, right? He's the sort of enemy stand user. And she does trust this, and because of that, um, that's like her accepting Josuke into the family. Because like, if she hadn't accepted him into the family, she wouldn't have believed him, and who knows what would have happened. The guy Tamaki would have probably won right there. And that's at about the halfway point in the story. Up to this point, she did basically nothing. And then after that, she does more nothing. Um, and yeah, neither of them feel very utilized at all. Uh, which really is a bit of a disappointment. So then, there's Joshu, who is a much more significant character. He's used a lot, often in sort of as a joke. But he still plays an important role because he is initially the most opposed to like the existence of Josuke in the family. Everyone else is kind of ambivalent to it, I guess, but he like really wants him gone, and that's partly because he is romantically interested in Yasuho, and Yasuho is obviously interested in Josuke. So there's sort of this sort of jealousy there. But because they are the same age, um, they actually end up bonding relatively quickly through this like shakedown road thing. Um, and then after that, it's very mixed, I would say. His thoughts on Josuke, but basically, generally, he he appreciates Josuke, but he also doesn't like him because Yasuo is interested in him at the same time. And it takes the entire manga, the entire story, for him to really accept. He's sort of, if anything, he's the final acceptor. On the like very last chapter, he's like, they are in like a cake shop, and he's like, "Oh, Josuke, you should pick the cake because you're like one of the family or whatever." And that's really the first time he acknowledges it. However, he's like a slow burn because he starts to go towards acknowledging it right from the start. He's sort of the most easy to follow as like a representative of the family as a unit accepting him. Because it's a full like gradual thing. It's not just like one moment happens, like with Dio and Hato, and then like he's in, right? Yeah. Am I making sense? I don't even really know. And then we've got Mitsuba. So she is in a weirder position because she came into the family from outside, and so by far the person she's the closest to is Jobin. And Jobin is essentially the like primary antagonist within the family and someone who never accepts Josuke into the family. So there's obviously like a much more difficult um it almost symbolically will take more convincing. And you could say that should be the case with Tsurugi as well, but because Tsurugi is a child, um it's just not really the case. Children just be doing whatever, right? Um, but yeah, Mitsuba is a really great character in general, though she doesn't get utilized very much until the end of the story. But I actually think that's completely fine in her case. She's almost this background person who we don't pay attention to at all until it's almost too late, and then it's almost this realization of, oh wait, well she was actually important the whole time. Because as it turns out, she's like being manipulated by the bad guys and stuff. Basically, so they can almost like control her into getting them what they want. Um, and importantly, um, it isn't like Josuke who manages to sort of ally with her, I guess. It's actually Yasuho, because Josuke isn't there, he's doing something else. Then he shows up later. Um, and you could say that because I don't know how I'm going to word this here. This is really tough to explain. Okay, so like because of this mutual trust she has in Yasuho, because Yasuho saves her life, and then Yasuho places trust in Josuke after when he arrives, she then places faith in Josuke. And if Yasuho hadn't already done that, she would never have actually done that in the first place, right? And there's a reward for that because she then unlocks her stand, which I just don't know how that stand works at all. But anyway, it seems like it's a pretty strong stand. um, but yeah, so everyone in the family has now at this point, at least to some degree, accepted Josuke, with of course one exception, and that is Jobin, who is definitely a very strong character. Um, so Jobin is significant because his role in the family is clear. He's going to take over. One day he will be sort of the head of the family. He's the oldest son. He survived having the disease. Um, and he has a very different attitude to Norisuke on everything. With Norisuke, it's all about making sure that you and everyone around you are sort of comfortable and happy in your sort of position. There's no reason to, force your way up the ladder. You can just maintain your sort of position. But with Norisuke, not Norisuke, with Jobin, it's all about climbing. It's all about gaining power and winning. He talks about winning and losing, like all the time, and how the family is gonna like, the business they have is gonna like fail, and he needs to do all these things for the business, and it's a fruit business. That's why he's like obsessed with this magic fruit, the Lokakaka. Um, and making sure that he has it and he can use it for the family. And he's acting like he's doing this all for the good of the family. But in reality, the good of the family is just to make sure everyone gets to stay in their nice house. And I think that I've put a picture of it on here. There's an excellent symbolic thing in his car. So Jobin, um, he has a lovely Lamborghini, which Josuke actually wins in a stag beetle fight, which is one of the, I mean, it sounds very interesting, really, but it's one of the most boring parts of the whole story, I thought. But anyway, so you might be wondering, why does he have a Lamborghini? Is this really like symbolically important? But I think it really is. See, the thing is, this is such an excessive luxury that the only reason you would have this car, the only reason anyone needs a Lamborghini is to say to other people, I'm successful. Look at me, I'm successful. Um, Whereas with Norisuke, who is also incredibly rich, the family is very rich. He has a big house and he has some nice cars, but they're functional cars, and the house is big so that this quite large family can exist comfortably within it, and everyone has personal space and things. So to him, what he's doing with his success is making sure that everyone else has a sort of easy, comfortable life. But with Jobin, he needs to, make sure people know that he's successful, and that comes through in the form of that Lamborghini. He needs to make sure people know he's winning. He needs to be constantly winning, right? It's everything is either like a victory or a loss to him, and that attitude um, results in him essentially, one, being an antagonist, and two, because it means he never accepts Josuke in, because Josuke is opposed to that because he's trying to get the fruit, but not for the purpose of winning. He's trying to get the fruit to save Holly. He never accepts Josuke into the family, and essentially he's punished by the story for having this attitude to life and to Josuke as well, by being the only member of the family who dies. He's killed. He's one of the last people to be killed in the story. Um, and it's very sudden as well. I didn't expect him to die at that point in time. I sort of expected that he would die, but it literally comes very suddenly. He basically sees the enemy and dies in about 10 seconds. But yeah. And I mean, it's pretty obvious, right? He's the only member of the family who's sort of in this obsessed with winning attitude, and he's the only member of the family who dies. So he's essentially the only member of family whose philosophy to life was wrong, because he then failed to sort of live, right? So the message is pretty clear here. And I think this is very clear. It's all about like living an easy life, or like a comfortable life, is like the correct thing. That's what Araki wants us to think here. And he does that, he performs that message excellently through the character of Jobin. What goes on with Jobin is really strong. He's one of my favorite characters in the part. And I think also with his stand, it's worth noting that he's the only person in the family whose stand is most effective when used offensively. Everyone else's is more just like for support or like defensive purposes. Like it can be used to attack somebody, but that's not the best use of it. It's best used in a defensive situation. Except for Jobin's, which is basically, it's like a temperature control thing, which is obviously most effective when used offensively. I always enjoy the way the stands sort of symbolize things, and I felt that this is one of the only ones which really stuck out to me in this part, which was a little disappointing, and I'll talk about the stands later um, in the video. Anyway, so it's worth noting why Jobin has this attitude, and the reason is because of, essentially, it's because of trauma. So when Jobin was a kid, he accidentally killed another kid who was like bullying him. And his mother, who we've got on the left, her name is Kato, found out. She finds the body and she decides, well, this guy lost at life because he died, so let's take advantage of that by using him as the sacrifice to cure your disease. And Kato ended up going to prison for the death of the other child. And so essentially here, what we're seeing is, he's the only member of the family, right, who goes through any sort of trauma as a child, and he's also the only member of the family who ends up with this silly attitude. And I think, to me, I don't think this is a huge surprise. What this is saying is, if somebody has trauma, they could end up in like a seriously dangerous situation because nobody knew that he got this trauma. For like years and years, the body wasn't even found or anything. Then Kato gets arrested like years later, and Jobin never told anyone that he was even the person who was the real killer, or even that he knew it happened. Right? Norisuke, etc., they don't even know that Jobin went through that. So they aren't able to like help him with this, and as a result, he sort of generates this very poor attitude to life, which eventually results in, as I've already mentioned, essentially leads to his death. His obsession with the fruit is what leads to his death. And yeah, very unfortunate, really. But I think it's quite an effective message, and I don't necessarily disagree with it, so I'm pretty happy with that. And then finally, thing worth noting with this sort of theme of family is that the main antagonist, really like the final guy, the final stand user who kills Jobin, etc., is this guy Toru. And worth noting that he's bad, and also he doesn't have a family at all, which I think says quite a lot symbolically as well. I think Araki really places a very high importance in family in general, and he decided to really communicate that in this part because, we've got our main villain here. He doesn't have a family because he's like, there's like a race of like rock people who make up the bad guys. And the way they like function is they abandon their children in like the woods when they're born, and then they don't raise them. So this poor guy Toru has literally never had a family. And the sort of message here would be from Araki, he's bad because he didn't have that familial role. He doesn't have like a real role model, so he doesn't have sort of the morals of that role model aren't imprinted onto him. So he becomes this very evil, manipulative guy who's like controlling the fruit, and he wants to do a lot of bad things. And I'll talk more about how Toru is implemented narratively later because I have some issues with that. But I think from this symbolic standpoint, he's a pretty strong character. So, well done there. However, while all of that is very strong, everything I've gone through there is very strong, and the family dynamic is very strong. They often cut to like half a chapter of just some of the like less relevant members of the family, like Hato and Dio and Joshu, just like messing around and having a laugh, and Norisuke as well. And I always enjoy those parts. They're really strong. They really cement that idea that this family is like everything. It's the core of the story, and like it's what we need to be focused on, really, more than the like big conspiracy that's going on that Josuke is trying to sort of uncover with Toru and stuff. There are a lot of things I don't like about this part as well, so we'll go through some of those now. The first of these is that Joshu is unbelievably annoying. He's one of the most annoying characters I've ever seen. And admittedly, it's not like Araki thinks he isn't annoying, but the idea is that he's so annoying, but oh, it's funny because he's such an embarrassing, like, incel loser, basically. Um, However, like, it just doesn't work. It's not funny. It's just grating. It's just infuriating that in the final battle, Yasuho is trying to fight Toru essentially like one-on-one, and Toru has like an insanely strong stand, and he's just there like complaining about how Yasuho should be interested in him instead of Josuke and stuff. And I mean, in this panel, I'm pretty sure he's like calling her a slut and stuff, and it's just ridiculous. It's not entertaining at all. It's just annoying, and I don't want him around in a lot of the story. Um, and it's a shame because it means originally he was clearly supposed to be almost like a partner to Josuke, in the same way that somebody like almost like Gyro or like Mister or like Hermes, right? But like they had to replace him halfway through the story because he was so annoying. And the second issue I have, I already touched on this with Hardo and Dio, but a lot of these characters feel underutilized because all three of these people are very interesting. They have interesting personalities, they have interesting backgrounds, they have interesting stands, and all three of them are used once, and then we never see them again. And with Kado, that's especially weird because of the incredibly important role her actions played in shaping the philosophy of who is really the main antagonist, even if he died before Toru did. He's the real main antagonist because he's the most present in the story. Her actions literally shape that, and then, like, she comes out of prison and then is in, like, 2 scenes and then shows up at the end. And it's really disappointing. And I think it's maybe worth noting that all three of these underutilized characters here are women. Though I don't think it's like a huge thing or anything. Maybe something subconscious is going on there. I don't know for sure though. Either way, it's a real issue. There were lots of underutilized characters in this. And speaking of that, nobody is more underutilized than Nijimura, Kei Nijimura, who is the maid and is actually Kira's sister as well. She is the third, stand user who Josuke fights. Then he finds out it's Kira's sister, and they sort of form this little alliance. And then she doesn't show up until the end when Yasuho calls her to help out. And then the moment she shows up to help Josuke at like the hospital, she dies instantly. And I'm just gonna say it. What a waste of a character. She doesn't do anything else. They really set her up to be important. And then she just dies. Like, she just shows up again and dies. It's really silly. I'm not happy about it. It's probably the most underutilized character ever in JJBA. Really poor from Araki. This was someone with serious potential, and it was just sort of wasted. Speaking of wasted potential as well, actually, we've got lots of speaking ofs here. This is our main group of villains. These are like the rock people who are controlling the distribution of the like magic fruit. I would say only 2 of these characters have any strength to them at all. And the first of them is Toru because of the sort of symbolic thing about his character. The only issue I have with Toru is that he's introduced really late in the story. He's introduced when the only other person still alive in this group is Wu. And the problem there is that he just shows up too late. He's also Yasuho's ex. And there's this idea here that Araki really like flaunts in our face. He's like, this is the bad guy, but I'm not actually telling you that. It's just really, really obvious because it's the only narrative thing that would make sense. And at the same time, so we get like annoyed at him because it's so obviously he's the bad guy, and the characters just don't realize, right? and the sort of that develops an anger. And simultaneously, what it's supposed to, I think, do is it's supposed to parallel that Josuke is doesn't like Toru because Toru continuously flaunts that he already dated Yasuho, right? But the issue is, um, Josuke doesn't really seem to care about that at all. And not to mention, like, he doesn't even really seem that interested in Yasuho to begin with a lot of the time. Um, like, they don't have as much romantic chemistry as I think Araki thinks they have. And he could have put that in there. He could have had more bonding moments with them. Maybe, like, because they cut to the family a lot. They easily could have just cut to Josuke and Yasuho hanging out in some moments instead. And that would have worked really effectively. And I think that would have made it more obvious that Josuke was sort of jealous of Toru. And then that sort of parallel would have worked a lot more effectively. But as a result, all that happens is it just is annoying that it's so obvious that Toru is the bad guy. And not only a bad guy, but like the bad guy, which he is. The only other character here I love is actually Yotsuyu, who is the one who is like threatening Tsurugi, and Norisuke and Josuke have to team up on him. And the reason for that is he's actually the first of these rock humans we meet, and essentially, um, he seems a lot more threatening because the more of these are introduced, the less threatening they seem. Like this guy is so forgettable, and this guy too, and these two. Like they're just really unbelievable. All of this bottom row, in fact, is just super forgettable characters. But Yotsuyu, he feels like a real threat. He feels important. He's threatening because he's endangering the life of this child. He puts up a serious fight against both Norisuke and Josuke. Like he's a really he has like a real personality, and he's really well designed. I mean, this picture's just awesome. Um, yeah. To me, that's sort of the extent, though. The other six here, largely forgettable characters, unfortunately. Now my next issue is really minor and specific, but I kind of don't like some of the stuff with the fruit. And I don't really know how to explain it because I think the fruit in of itself is quite an interesting idea, this sort of equivalent exchange fruit thing. But I think it's just the way it's like utilized some of the time. Outside of in the sort of climax, every time the fruit is eaten, and the forming of Josuke time they ate the fruits just don't feel like they're that important. Like people are eating them for stuff that doesn't matter at all. Um, and also there's like some of the stuff that happens after they eat the fruit. So notably, this old guy buys a fruit from one of the like dealers of the fruit, basically, and it means that he gets his legs to like work properly again. And then he goes to his car where his wife is, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I get to fuck my wife." And then his eyes like turn into dust and fall out, and it's like so unnecessarily creepy because that was obviously supposed to be like a comedic moment, and then this like insanely creepy thing happens. And in general, I think the fruit is really freaky, and they don't really address it enough. Like it's just sort of like accepted that this fruit does these insanely like horrific things. Like genuinely imagine your eyes like turn to dust and fall out of their sockets, right? Like that's horrendous. But it's sort of treated as almost comedic. And consistently, the fruit's weird and genuinely like concerning effects are treated as comedic. And generally, there's too many things that are treated as a joke in this that don't really work, I think. Anyway, to move on to some stuff I'm more like neutral on, I guess. There's this guy, Ojiro, who's just like a minor antagonist. He shows up at one point, he steals the fruit from Jobin, then Jobin kills him. Irrelevant. But what's important about him is that he's like the only real bad guy in the entire story who isn't a rock person. And I think that's kind of really important because the thing is, there are only 8 or 9 rock people in the story, and all 9 of them are the bad guys. And there's only 10 actual bad guys if you exclude Jobin in the story. There are other stand users they fight, but it's always like a misunderstanding with them. So the only actually effective like bad guy who isn't a rock human is Sasame, and it really just shows that like there's like scummy stuff, all the time. Now I think it maybe could have been more effective if they had a rock person character who wasn't evil. If they had that, I actually would have really enjoyed that. I would have loved to see that dynamic, but they don't go for that. But this is like sort of similar in idea, and it's sort of effectively done. And I like his character, I like his personality. He's so sleazy. Um, I fuck with him a lot. I think he's sort of yeah. He's better than a lot of people with more significance in the story, which is unfortunate for them. And then there's Rai, who is he's like essentially Joshu's replacement, I guess, in my theory that he was originally supposed to be the main sort of buddy of Josuke in this part, in the same way that like Mister or somebody is, or Bruno, or like Hermes, or Gyro. Halfway through the story, after the halfway point, Norisuke is like, "You gotta meet my fruit expert, Rai, and he'll help you find the fruit." And so we're introduced to this new character a bit too late in the story to introduce basically a new like supporting like primary supporting agent, who's just as important as Yasuho, and then he basically follows Josuke around constantly for the entire rest of the manga. Like they are inseparable. And the thing is, he has a kind of interesting origin story. Um, it's not terrible, and his personality is not annoying, but it is very forgettable. And in general, I would say he's too forgettable of a character, especially considering that he was introduced quite late. Um, and there's a really weird moment where the second stand Josuke and Rai encounter together, Rai like it's made out like he dies. He actually lives. He dies. He does die before the end of the story, but he doesn't die there. But the way they make it out is like he died there, and then Josuke is like, you know how they have like often when they're fighting like an important stand user in this series, he'll like stand there and be like, "I'll do it for you," and then like dead people will appear in the back, and they have Rai in the back, and it's as if he was there for like maybe what 6 chapters. I don't think he has enough significance in the story to like appear in the background like that yet. When it does happen at the very end of the story after he's died for real, obviously it works then. He was around long enough, but it's so silly to me that they did that. It just came. It made me laugh, and I felt really bad because I did think Rai had actually died already. So it's like a very unfortunate sort of circumstance. Maybe I'm cruel for that. I don't know. And then the final thing I wanted to talk about is the stands. So the stands in this part, this is every single stand in the part, by the way. I managed to fit them all in one slide. I mean, it's very cluttered, but I'm pretty happy with myself for that. To put it lightly, none of them are boring or unoriginal. They're all unique. They're all interesting to watch. But I just didn't I just didn't care about how the different stands overcame each other, to be honest. To put it simply, there have been so many stands at this point, and they've all been unique, that it's now become such of a norm that like more needs to be done than this to make them really interesting. And there are exceptions. I like Yasuo's stand. I like Toru's stand, which is like if somebody tries to pursue him, they go into like a Final Destination-esque scenario. I like this stand where like where they like can like melt people into the floor and shit. That's cool as fuck. But like generally, as much as they're unique stands, none of them particularly blew me away, and I feel like more needs to be done. It's not just the stands have to be interesting. You have to make the dynamic between the two stand users who are fighting interesting, and that is something that this part really struggled to do, unfortunately. And in general, to conclude, in terms of this part's place in the overall story, my concern is that this part tried to do too much, but not in like a traditional way, where it tried to surpass the previous parts. It's not trying to surpass part 6 or 7. It's trying to be the same. If you think about sort of how big, I guess, each story is in terms of how, I don't know how else to describe it, how big it is. You know what you sort of, I hope you know what I mean, right? um, but first 5 parts aren't that big, and then 6 and 7 are really big for different reasons, and part 8 is trying to be that big as well. But like, it's quite difficult to maintain 3 stories this big in a row. Like, you're gonna get tired, and then you're gonna sort of stumble, and things are gonna go wrong, and that's what happened in this part. And what I think genuinely should have been done is Araki just needed to make like a smaller part. He just needed to make a smaller story. Like, he could have made a Mario story of the same size as part 4, but instead he went bigger, he went more complicated. And what happened in general really is just that it fell on it and it fell over. It just didn't work, right? It fell on its head and it got disoriented, and we're left with this, with sort of things that feel underutilized, and some like the sort of good guy to bad guy relationship is quite poor. I didn't really touch on that. And really annoying characters and unfunny jokes, um, which are uncharacteristic. They haven't been present for 2 parts at least, and 5 wasn't this shaky either. 6 and 7 are much stronger than this too. And honestly, I'd say I don't know if I could even give this, maybe like teetering. It's like on the border of a 6 and a 5 out of 10, really, and it's in the weaker half of the parts, which is unfortunate. But I think it's easy to turn this around. Make a slightly smaller scale story for part 9, and you're probably back on track, which I'm assuming is what's going to happen, because from what I've seen, part 9 is well liked. But I won't be covering it, as I said at the beginning, until it's finished. I don't know how long that'll take. I think it's probably pretty far through at this point. It's been in production for a while, right? I think this one ended in like 2018 or something, so it can't have been that recent that it started, right? Probably. I hope. What I am gonna do, probably in the next like week or so, is I am gonna make a video rounding out the series. What I think I'm probably gonna do is make a video ranking the parts, and maybe in the same video I'll do a character ranking as well, because I do like the idea of doing something like that. So yeah, expect another video in like a week. Less than a week, maybe slightly more, depending on when I get the motivation to do this. Um, and yeah, I mean, that's all there is to say. Yeah, cool. Bye.